Welcome into another edition of the CFF Site's preseason preview series. This time we're talking about the AAC. I'm joined by my partner, Mike Bainbridge. And Mike, we opened up things with the ACC already. We've got one of these down. We're going to go conference by conference, team by team. We teed that up in yesterday's show when we did that. And we're going to hop right into the AAC, man. Are any big differences here? You and I talked before we started recording. I think we're going to see a lot of the questions that we're going to have for some of these teams are going to be pretty straightforward. I wouldn't even be surprised. And just to let everyone know, you and I did not go over the questions, rehearse anything. So it's interesting. I think we're going to probably land on some common themes here. What's your thoughts going into the conference preseason preview here?
How timely it is that we're doing the American Athletic, because I mean the report came out today that the commissioner of the AAC is talking with the remaining Big 12 teams. So maybe this is the last time we're talking about just 12 teams for the American Athletic. So looking forward to getting into it.
Yeah, that's the great thing. I mean, it's like we spoke about this and touched on it yesterday. Whenever you start doing these, you want to get in and get out as quick as possible, because sometimes news can turn on its head very quickly. And so we want to make these and keep these podcasts and shows as relevant as possible for as long as we can. And now with the end of July here, August is upon us, and college fantasy football draft season's really heating up. So, man, with that being said, we're going to go. Let's jump right into the teams here on what we're looking for over at the AAC. And like we did with the ACC, we're just going to go in reverse order of last year's standing. So we're going to start off with the Bulls down there in South Florida. Mike, what's your big question? What are we looking for in preseason camp as we go into the 2021 season with South Florida?
Yeah, not a lot here. It's kind of like Virginia Tech we discussed yesterday. I don't have a lot of focus with South Florida. But my question with them is, can Xavier Weaver, their our projected top wide receiver for them, can he stack together a strong fall camp after what he did in the spring? I think possibly a South Florida receiver could be relevant this year in college fantasy. I mean, the USF did throw it 35 times per game last year, so you would think that somebody could end up being relevant. But just it's kind of a mess at quarterback there right now, and we don't know exactly who's going to start. So just looking to see if Xavier Weaver can maybe stack together another strong camp after what he did in the spring.
Yeah, I think two guys we're watching are Weaver and Dollison as well, right? The question for me is going to be at running back, and this is something that we've tossed around as well, right? You've got Kelly Joyner there, Darian Felix, Brian Beatty, the Colorado transfer, Jaron Mangum. Is it going to just hold true as a running back by committee, or are they going to actually commit to one player? That's going to be tough to say. And to be honest with you, much like we mentioned on some teams last year, I have a feeling we're going to go a couple of weeks into the season before we're really going to get a read on what we're going to get out of the South Florida backfield. But, for us, it's college fantasy football. What we want those workhorse backs, and we may not get anything in the preseason camp that tells us that we're going to get a workhorse back. But much like we mentioned with a team yesterday, a program yesterday, South Florida definitely will be one of those programs where you and I are going to have our eyes on the preseason camp. And don't be surprised if you see a name or two from this program on our waiver wire list after the first couple of weeks. And I think for me, a lot of that's going to be, how's the backfield? What's the rotation? Is there going to be a rotation? Is it going to be a committee, or will it be one guy? Right now, any thoughts on who your running back one is right now?
No, I honestly don't have a clue there. I think it'll be a rotation for much of the year.
Yeah, I think we landed on Joyner to kind of start off the projections, but that's something that you and I probably can see flip-flopping throughout preseason as we get reports coming in. And remember, too, one thing that plays, but it's unfortunate. We don't wish injury on anyone, but sometimes injuries are the biggest blessing in college fantasy football, because it does weed out the pack a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see how healthy the group of four names that I just threw out are, and maybe that affects the running back rotation as we get into the season. Now, let's move over to Temple. Temple quarterback DeJuan Mathis transferred there from Georgia. I know he's one of your guys that you like this year, one of your sleeper picks. What's your question for Temple going into preseason camp?
Yeah, it's Dwan Mathis. Just he's already been announced the starter. So I just kind of want to see how he looks and how the coaches are talking about him now that he's been confirmed as a starter. I kind of mentioned it in our names to know column. The Temple offense is going to reflect kind of what we saw at NIU with Rod Carey, as opposed to he couldn't really do that last year with Anthony Russo. So I know the QB1 there at NIU averaged around 500 rushing yards per season. So, if Mathis, he's a good athlete. So I think if he can perform to that level and put up similar numbers, then he could be, a long shot, QB4, QB5 on your roster. So I want to see how he performs this fall.
Yeah, and I think for me as well, with Mathis coming in at quarterback, one of the biggest questions I have is going to be how will that affect the wide receivers and the production there? How often will they throw the ball compared to, when Russo was there? But, the other big question for me for Temple pretty much mirrors what we were talking about over at South Florida, right? If they're going to be a little bit more run heavy, we've got Dwan Mathis, who is we are assuming he's going to be the starter, right? But who's going to be in that backfield there? You've got Iverson Clement, Tavon Ruley, Ravon Biner, Bonner Clement, both transfers. You got Dobbins, you've got Sadie, you've got about 5 backs right there that could kind of rotate through. And so it'll be interesting to see, are we looking at another committee approach there, or will those transfers really emerge and be the cream of the crop? Will they wind up leaning on 1 or 2 guys? And so for me, and I know for both of us, we'll be watching that as well throughout preseason camp, because like you mentioned, it's all about, recognizing Mathis's progression, but we know that he's likely to open up as the starter. Whereas with running back, for me, there's just a few more questions of who's going to take the first snap in the backfield, and will one or 2 of those guys possibly stick? And will we see a couple of backs with over 100, 125 carries, or will it be a true rotation?
Yeah, similar to USF, what we just spoke about. I think it's going to be a committee approach, but in what's different with Temple is that you're going to have Mathis that's going to dip into that rushing volume, where at USF, you're not going to have a quarterback, whoever starts there, that's really going to tote the rock, 100 times. So really no interest in the Temple backfield right now. I think it'll be a committee approach. And then one added note I wanted to add, with the receivers, Jaden Blue is going really late in drafts. I think his ADP is sitting at 101 right now.
Yep.
And this is a guy that had a 95 catch season in the past. Now, do we expect him to hit that? No. But I mean, this guy's been productive in the past. So I think he's a real good kind of late round option.
Yeah, it's a good point. He has been going fairly late, and particularly in PPR leagues, I think he would be a really solid option as well. That, great value of where he's going in drafts right now. Let's head over to East Carolina, Mike. What's your question for the Pirates as we get into this season? Last year didn't really play out as I had planned for Holton Ahlers, wide receiver CJ Johnson. What are your questions for East Carolina going into preseason camp that you're going to have your eyes on?
Yeah, I want to see if we get the November version of Holton Ahlers in September and October. I mean, he was not very good last year, but you can attribute a lot of that to how poorly the offensive line was playing, and he just had to go off script more than he should have had to last year. And then he obviously threw too many interceptions, and his completion percentage wasn't what we want to see. So I'm hopeful that the returning offensive line is improved since last year, which I think in turn will help Holton Ahlers. Now, I think, we've been going through these best ball formats, or these best ball drafts recently, and I think that's where you really want to target Ahlers, just because of that high upside. He had multiple 30-point games last year, but you're also going to get those duds. Now, if the offensive line, it smooths out a little bit and they perform at a better level this year, maybe get some more consistency with Ahlers, but I do like him best in a best ball format.
Yeah, I think for me, what I want to see as we get into preseason camp with these guys is, how do they show up? What kind of condition are they in? I know you and I had done a little research earlier in the spring, and it looked like Holton Ahlers had really taken to committing himself to his conditioning. I know, the coach was talking about how he looked quicker, he looked stronger, he looked faster. That's encouraging. If you're drafting Ayler's another player that you and I are seeing right now going a lot later in drafts than he was a year ago, right? And I think I could say the same thing in regards to wide receiver CJ Johnson, where there were some questions about his condition for last year, and obviously if that was the case, it carried over into his performance. He was just super inconsistent, and so I'm looking at that thinking if these guys are dedicated themselves to getting themselves in shape, then they're dedicating themselves not only physically but probably mentally as well. Maybe we see a different CJ Johnson this year as well. So I really want to see how these two guys show up condition wise in preseason camp. That really could be very telling for this offense that, now we know that they've got a couple of capable backs out there as well, right? So, these two guys really have a chance to complete the offense, in my opinion.
Yeah, I actually looked it up before we got on the pod here, and CJ is down 13 pounds since last year. So he has put in the work this offseason with his conditioning.
So there you go. So yeah, those are the two things we'll be looking at. And I, if that, like I said, if that's the case, I know CJ Johnson is a guy that's going very late, right? And so there's really no risk in drafting him in late drafts where he's going right now in a lot of the drafts that you and I are participating in the best ball leagues. He's going as late as like wide receiver 5 or 6 in some teams. Let's head down to Tulane, Mike. Obviously, different offense coming in a little bit with Chip Long coming in running the offense. What are the questions for the Green Wave for you that you're going to have your eyes on in this preseason leading up to the new year?
Yeah, it's just that I want to see, do we get any more indications that Tulane will be throwing the ball more with Chip Long as the offensive coordinator? If you look back at Tulane averaged 26 passing attempts per game last year, and then if you look back at Chip Long during his time at Notre Dame, anywhere from 32 passing attempts per game, 27, both obviously more than 26. So we should expect to see Michael Pratt throw the ball a little bit more. I know you're a big fan of Pratt's. I wasn't early on kind of in this offseason just because he really didn't provide that upside. He was very consistent with his numbers last year, but didn't, I think he topped 30 fantasy points once last year. So that's not kind of what I target personally in my CFF drafts. But if he's throwing the ball 5 and 6 times more per game this year, plus the 12 carries a game that he averaged last year, I think you will see that upside from him. So
go
ahead.
No, in the latest best ball draft that we're doing right now, I just took him as my quarterback 4, right? So you are getting great value on him. You don't have to go super early to get him. And the one thing about Chip Long coming in is you feel like this was a move based on the quarterback that they have and the talent that they have, whereas traditionally Tulane's been a little bit more of a run first offense quarterback with Fritz there at coach. And you wonder if Long was brought in specifically to match the talents of what Pratt, what he brings to the table. And if so, and that's the case, like you mentioned, that's what we'll be watching. All of a sudden now a guy like Deuce Watts becomes incredibly valuable as well, which, another player, these two names that we're throwing out here are no names that you have to reach in any of the drafts that we're participating in. They're all going very late tail end of drafts past the 12th round. So tremendous value there if it, an upside if they happen to stick late. For me, I think the big question that I want to know is Tyjae Spears going to come back and return to his pre-injury form that he was, he opened up the 2020 season as the starter. And I think he opened up with back-to-back 100-yard games. I'm curious to see his health going into the new season because we know that they have Cameron Carroll, right? Who's back. And then they also added Devin Brumfield, the transfer that came in from Utah. So you've got 3 backs there now. And, if they do get a little bit more pass, throw a little bit more than they did last year, you wonder if one of those guys are going to, not be relevant and they turn into a 2-back system. But I think it really all depends on the health of Tyjae Spears. Because we know Cameron Carroll, he went double-digit touchdowns last year, right? And so for me, if you want a piece of the Tulane running game going into the season, which has been Fritz's calling card over the years, right? It's never, you can't go wrong when you've targeted one of the backs in his offense. It's hard to make that call unless we know exactly what's going on with Tyjae Spears as we get into preseason camp. And that's news that we'll probably find out pretty quickly.
Yeah, just to put a cap on that one, I would say, I guess I'm just looking to see how the Tulane offense performs under Long, just because, they do get 10 starters back on offense. So you would expect with that many returnees that they're going to take a step forward with the scheme change. I guess we'll see. But, you're getting everybody, Pratt, the running backs, the wide receivers late. So, I mean, those could be definite hits at the end of your drafts.
Yep. Now let's go over to Navy, Mike. If I was to take a guess on one team that I know where your question's going to be, I would venture to say that this one's going to be it. And I'm going to say we're going to be the same. And I mean, if I'm wrong, I may just delete myself off the show here.
Well, my initial question was, are they actually practicing in pads this offseason? They didn't. Apparently, they didn't last offseason before that opener against BYU, and then they got shellacked by the Cougars in that opening week. I wish I would have known that prior to that game happening. But honest question is, who starts at quarterback? Because these guys are going undrafted if not undrafted, they're going very late in our drafts that we've participated in. And you just have a long-standing history of Keenan Reynolds and Will Worth and Zach Abey and Malcolm Perry. These guys are getting 250 carries a season and almost 20 rushing touchdowns per season if Navy settles on one guy. Now, that's obviously the big question. Do they settle on one guy? Xavier Arline is the incumbent. He's still listed atop the depth chart right now, but he's slight of build. He's 176 pounds. He's gained weight since last offseason, I think 11 pounds, so that's good. But his challenger, Ty Lavatai, he's 220 pounds. So definitely contrast the body styles there. So, I mean, we'll see. We want to figure out who the starter will be and if they settle on one guy.
Yeah, we landed on the same question there. So the one thing that I'll just throw out to some of our followers right here is this Navy quarterback situation is sort of textbook, sort of tailor-made for benefiting those in best ball formats, right? Because when you're not familiar with when you're not sure who the quarterback's going to be, and you're in a redraft league with waiver pickups, we have 26-man rosters in this best ball league, drafting 12 owners. So there's guys that are going to have anywhere between 4 and 6 quarterbacks on their roster. You pick a guy like Xavier Arline somewhere halfway through the draft, and you're probably going to scare off anyone else from selecting Ty Lavatai. So you pretty much are, as long as you pick him sometime before the draft finishes, you're going to get a chance. You corner the market on the Navy quarterback, and at that point, you have to hope that one of them sticks and one of them is going to be productive. And like you mentioned, historically in that Navy offense, the quarterback is the position that you want. And so that's my recommendation. You're going to sit a little bit in redraft leagues, traditional format leagues, and in best ball leagues. You may find yourself going for our line, midway through the draft, take the Navy quarterback options off the board for everyone else, and then corner the market with Lavatai a little bit later.
Yeah, only thing I would add is I think they're a target in Dynasty as well. I know Arline is a sophomore, and I believe Lavatai is a sophomore as well. So if they settle on one, you're getting 3 years there.
Yep.
So definitely Dynasty targets as well.
Yeah, that's the one great thing about the academies, right? Is that we know that they're 99.9%. They're going into their until they exhaust their eligibility. There's really no guessing on the status of what class or when they're going to leave. So that is a good point there. What about down to Houston Cougars, Mike? Holgerson's program right there. Are they going to turn the corner? Clayton Tune still at quarterback here. What's your big question going into the new season?
Yeah, it centers around the wide receivers. I think, Clayton Tune didn't take that big step that I was personally projecting last year, but he was very productive from a fantasy standpoint. So no real major questions with him, but I want to know who he's throwing to. And it's strange in that, and you've seen it in our drafts that for a team that is throwing 37 times a game as they did last year, we're only seeing one receiver being selected in our drafts, and that's Nathaniel Dell. And, he's a good player, but I have questions with him with regards to his size because he's playing outside and he's 5'10", 155 pounds. So there's question marks there. And if Clayton Tune's throwing the ball 37 times a game and he takes a step forward, not only will Dell be valuable, but we should see somebody else be valuable as well. We're just not sure who that guy is.
Same thing for me. I just want to know if there's going to be a true wide receiver one. Like you mentioned, you got Nathaniel Dell. You've got the Texas Tech transfer Keyshawn Carter. You've even got guys there like Jeremy Singleton, Keandre Street. I think those are names we'll probably be talking about at some point, if not during camp, some point during the season. And so, for me, like you mentioned, they're going to throw the ball around so much. Is there going to be a legitimate wide receiver one that just kind of jumps out above the bunch? And so you and I are on the same page right there. Let's head over to Texas, over to SMU, man, where, change at quarterback is in effect. Got a ton of receivers coming back, running backs coming back. The only change really here on offense, significant changes at quarterback, which is that what you're eyeing in preseason camp?
Yeah, I was thinking two directions, maybe one, Reggie Roberson's health, but I guess we really haven't gotten any indication as to.
Well, that was mine. So we'll cover that after you cover the quarterbacks.
Sure. I guess, who's throwing all those receivers the ball, right? I know I listened to an SMU podcast, a couple of weeks back, and the one point that was stressed was while Tanner Mordecai, the Oklahoma transfer, is the favorite, this is a legit competition right now, and he's being pressed by Preston Stone, the incoming freshman, and heck, even a walk-on, Derek Green, I believe. I think he's Trent Green's son. And so he's even impressing. He's got the strongest arm of the three. So, we know that they're going to throw the ball a ton under Sonny Dykes. So we just need to find out who's that QB1 this year.
Yeah, almost feel like, even though we feel a little bit more comfortable going with Tanner Mordecai, still feels like one of those situations where, particularly in best ball, if you're going to go play out this season long term, best to have both as opposed to just having one. But I'm with you. To me, the health and the return of Reggie Roberson at wide receiver really, for me, affects everything at the receiver position on this team, because I know, Danny Gray was a guy that you liked last year, Mike, and he kind of got dinged up a little bit, and that really kind of put a damper on his season. And then, they lost Robertson as well. They still have Rashee Rice. They brought in Calcaterra over from, the transfer that came in from Oklahoma that we thought retired, right? But Roberson's health really does affect a lot of how the wide receiver pecking order plays out, because if he's not fully healthy, at least initially, then I think that's stock up for guys like Danny Gray, guys like Rashee Rice. But if he comes back fully healthy, that he's going to be playing in there. And this was something that we touched on the ACC show yesterday. Robertson was probably gone, right, with a good year, but he's back now. And I'm wondering if this is his return to get healthy, and it's about kind of staying healthy and maybe getting himself ready, have a few good games, see if he wants to take his game to the next level. I know he's going to be on some NFL draft boards if he's healthy. And I'm just curious to see, is there a rush to come back? Is he fully healthy to start the season? I think we'll probably get some news in preseason camp on some updates about his health, but his health really does affect the receiving pecking order and the values of Danny Gray and Rashee Rice.
Yeah. A point was made by somebody else in our draft that, like, I haven't heard anything negative about Reggie Roberson's health status. It doesn't mean that, he's not on progress or anything like that, but just, we haven't heard that he won't be back. So, we're under the assumption that he'll be ready for week one. We'll just be looking for confirmation that that's going to happen. Well,
and I'll give a shout out to the guys out on the Discord server. And if you're not over, a member yet and part of the Discord server community, everybody that we have in there, we're over 300 plus right now. As soon as somebody finds something that's surfing around, that's not, out there on the internet circulating around. We post it, we find out that, that's the tough part with college, the injury situation, right? It's just not full disclosure like you get in NFL. We may not find out anything on Reggie Roberson until we get up into the season. I mean, things in college tend to be a little hush hush when it comes to injuries. And so, that may be one we've got to keep an early eye out on, but it also could be one where we just don't get a lot of information because news just doesn't come readily out of SMU all the time, right?
Or any school.
So let's go to Central Florida. Let's go ahead and shift gears over there. Gus Malzahn taking over at Central Florida, who's making a claim that they want to be in the SEC too, Mike. What are we looking for from Central Florida here as we go into preseason camp heading into the new season?
Yeah, so I was kind of thinking about this, and UCF might be my number one question of any team in college football this year, just because we could see our rankings drastically change if we get some indication from Gus Malzahn that the UCF offense will kind of in this initial year will look like what it's been in years past, right? Is he going to do a full 180, flip the script and revert back to what, kind of what we saw at Auburn? Or is he going to lean on his strengths of the roster, which is Jalen Robinson, which is Dylan Gabriel, which is this passing game, the deep passing game?
Yeah.
So I'll be looking to see what he says more, coming into fall camp. I mean, these coaches are very secretive. We may not get any indication, but I think you see opposite ends of the spectrum of, hey, if it's like last year with the UCF offense, these guys were way too low on Dylan Gabriel and we're way too low on Jalen Robinson. So I'm very curious to see what this UCF offense.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna piggyback off of that though, and that's why the biggest question for me is at running back, right? Or when you think of Malzahn, is he going to tailor the offense to shadow a little bit of its 2020 self? I think that's going to be tough to do. I know. Malzahn has an offensive identity. He loves, finding that back. He's got Richards to come over from Auburn. We've got Bentavious Thompson there. You've got Johnny Richardson. You've got the young guy, RJ Harvey. You brought in Isaiah Bowser, the transfer from Northwestern. There's so many guys that we just don't know how that backfield is going to play out. And knowing Malzahn's history, personally, I think he'd probably like to identify a workhorse back there. And so when you're talking about whether our rankings will change drastically based on the type of offense that they're going to run for 2021, I agree. But I think our rankings, our running back rankings, tend to take on a different look too. If we get news that there's just one guy that's emerging as their go-to back, that guy's going to climb the rankings for us pretty quickly, knowing Gus Malzahn's history of working those backs into his system. So for me, that's, we're going to be watching both of those things going into the new season. Great point on your end. And, I'd love a piece of Gus Malzahn's running back one if we can identify that guy down there at Central Florida.
Yeah, I agree with you. Me personally, I don't think we're going to get that answer. I think it's going to be a committee approach. There's too many mouths to feed at this point.
Well, like we mentioned too, this is a situation that could take weeks to play out, right? All of a sudden, one or two injuries happen. You're down to 2 or 3 guys, and then one guy gets 25 carries one week, goes for 175 yards and 2 touchdowns. The next thing you know, they're riding him out, and that's their. So this could be something that, when we're talking about these running back battles that are playing out where they've got multiple, players involved. These are things that we're going to be watching not only through preseason camp, but it might take 4 or 5 weeks to play out, right? We talk about it all the time, college fantasy football. It's a game where leagues are won on the waiver wire, right? And so this could be a situation where maybe it's 4 or 5 weeks. Maybe they do have a running back one established and the first guy on the waiver wire to them, or before they can hit the waiver wire, if they're on a roster, that might be a hidden gem later on in the year. So definitely noted that. Good point. Let's go to Memphis too, where, change at quarterback there, right? Brady White gone, Grant Gunnell, most likely what we're projecting him to be the starting quarterback there. What's your question going into preseason camp with Memphis?
Yeah, I want to know if the running game as a whole will be improved this year over last year, because I know we kind of want to focus on the running backs where, Rodriguez Clark, Asa Martin, Kylan Watkins, that group just underperformed as a whole after Kenny Gainwell opted out. But we shouldn't dismiss the offensive line. They were terrible last year. I think they were 97th in line yards, and the coaching staff admitted it this spring that group needs to be improved as well. We've seen, Silverfield, their head coach, has a background of, he's their offensive line run game coordinator, so he knows this system, and it's a very similar system. So we should see we have seen in the past a productive running back out of this system. So I want to see if somebody emerges at running back, but also if this offensive line is improved as well.
Well, we talked about a little bit about this on yesterday's show when we touched on Florida State and Norvell leaving Memphis, going over there, and talked about his history of having really good, really productive fantasy running backs, right? Which is why I've got my eye on Jashawn Corbin over at Florida State. But even when Norvell left, the OC was left in place at Memphis. So we were thinking that chemistry was going to be fine. Continuity was going to be great. I know for me, Rodriguez Clark, I had him high up in the rankings last year, right? Because you just felt like the offense, quarterback coming back, you felt like that there was going to be, just that continuity and they'd be able to kind of pick up where they left off. That didn't happen, right? And so it's kind of strange to look at our running back rankings right now. And for me not to have a Memphis running back in the top 40 feels odd, just knowing the recent history of what running backs have done at Memphis over the last few years. And, right now, if I'm writing a player right now, I'm looking at Asa Martin a little bit more than I am Rodriguez Clark, but that's definitely something that we've got to monitor. We know that Kylan Watkins is going to have his role in the offense, but whether or not Martin or Clark, or is there another guy that's really going to emerge as that true running back one, if they do and they live up and perform close to historically what Memphis running back ones have over the last few years, then that's going to be a guy that's going to be a late draft find or a waiver wire find somewhere when the season starts too, right?
Yeah, I mean, these guys are going undrafted in our best ball formats for the most part. So definitely going to monitor the waiver wire, see if somebody pops in those early
Yep. Now let's get into the last two teams, in this conference. Obviously, we'll start with Tulsa, where another team where a lot of skill position players come back, right? Except at quarterback, where we're looking at Davis Brin in there. Any major questions for you for Tulsa going into this new season?
Yeah, I want to know where Shamari Brooks is at health-wise. We don't have a ton of updates. I think Philip Montgomery, their head coach, spoke at their media day, and he said he's ahead of schedule. What that exactly means, I'm not sure, because he didn't give confirmation that he would be available week one. So we could be looking at a situation where Deneric Prince is the week one starter for Tulsa if Brooks isn't ready to go. They bring back, I think, all five starters along the offensive line, which was pretty good last year, ranked 67th in line yards. So it's a really good group of linemen that whomever the starter is going to be running behind. You're typically going to see a 200-plus carry back from Tulsa in this system. So I want to know if Shamari Brooks is going to be ready to go for the opener.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, you look at the receivers, they come back, Stokes, Santana, right? Johnson, Crawford, they all come back. There's no question of what's going on at wide receiver. They're going to probably spread the ball around. But when TK Wilkerson left that, when he basically ended his career over there, that put it down to a two-horse race with Shamari Brooks and, Deneric Prince. And like you said, if Brooks is not healthy or, is slow to return, you've got possibly a workhorse back right there in Deneric Prince that's going to see a ton of carries, which that's what we always want in college football. We want the high volume guys. Now, we can't assume that right now. We're going to assume that Brooks is going to be there and Brooks is coming back. But like you said, until we actually get, the video evidence or just the proof that he's coming back and looking his old self right now, Deneric Prince is the guy that you've got to kind of keep on your watch list right now, because if Brooks comes back and he doesn't look like his old self, Prince, you possibly, like you just mentioned, you could be looking at a 200 plus carried back right there. And if that's the case, he'll far exceed his draft value of where he's going right now.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that, I think both are capable. And if you're gonna draft one, I think you should draft the other, because Tulsa typically hits that 400 carry mark in a season, just as a team. Just looking back a couple years, we had a situation where Shamari Brooks and Corey Taylor were both, rosterable on a CFF roster. So I think it's just with the health, the offensive line being a really good group this year. I think it'd be wise to draft both Brooks and Prince. And
here's another point to yeah, and here's a point to consider too, Mike. And it's interesting you say that, because when you talk about 400 carry backs in that offense, remember now, we're going in reverse order. This is a team that played in the AAC championship game last year, right? So this isn't a team like we were talking about, when we were talking about Temple at the beginning of the show, or a team that may be playing from behind. And when that happens, it's tough to lean on the running game. Tulsa's defense should be pretty good again. Their receivers are going to be solid. I'm expecting them to finish in the top half of the AAC. And that's what you want. If you can get the backs off of the better teams, then what you're looking at is some extra carries late in ball games, as opposed to playing from behind and always putting it in the air.
Yeah, I wish I pulled up their over under for wins this year, but I believe they're expected to be pretty good in the AAC. So that you make a good point where they're breaking in a new quarterback, although there's confidence that Davis Brin is going to be even an upgrade over or Zach Smith from last year. But you got a team that's probably going to be really good in the American. You're breaking in a new quarterback. They could lean on that running game if they have a lead against their opponents.
Yep. Now let's give the final team, AAC champions, coming back. A lot of pieces coming back, particularly the key piece in Desmond Ridder at quarterback. Cincinnati should have another solid defense again. Probably the favorites once again to win the conference. Any major questions that you're looking at in Cincinnati? I know there's none for me. I have my eye maybe on one piece, but I'll start with you. What are you going to be looking for Cincinnati in preseason camp?
Yeah, I just want to see how the division of carries is kind of split up. I think that's why I'm higher on Jerome Ford this year. I see him getting a Michael Warren type workload this year, just kind of after what he showed late last year, especially in that bowl game against Georgia. He's a good pass catcher out of the backfield. I just think he's going to see, definitely 200 plus carries this year, probably 20 receptions if you're projecting closer to what Michael Warren did. And then how does that affect Desmond Ridder if they have a workhorse running back, with Ford in that backfield? Do we see some regression with his rushing? Because if you look back over, the Mike Denbrock, their offensive coordinator, if you kind of look back, the 12 rushing touchdowns that Desmond Ridder had is an outlier from what we should expect out of Denbrock's quarterbacks. So does Jerome Ford kind of eat up those goal line carries that Ridder had last year? So maybe we see some regression from Ridder. So just kind of the division of carries with Ford. I have no idea who's going to be the RB2 there. Hence why I'm very high on Ford this year, and then how that affects Desmond Ridder.
Yeah, I think one thing that I'll bring up, and we both looked at the piece that we did in the preseason fantasy draft guide when we looked at the quarterbacks, right? There was a stretch, and I'm trying to pull it up real quick, looking at it, where we looked at the top quarterbacks from last year: Malik Willis, Rattler, Corral, Howell, McCall, Ridder. There was a 5-game stretch in there where Ridder was better than all of those quarterbacks. Now, the problem was long-term consistency, right? But there was a stretch of, I'm looking at it right now, 5 games where I think he went for, it was almost 40 points a game. So, that 5-game stretch right there put a lot of people in position to win some leagues. And I would argue that's great when you see that. It's great for best ball formats. And so Not a lot of questions there. I'm on board with you about Ford getting that Michael Warren heavy workload, 200 plus carries. I think we're there. I think the one thing that really I think plays in Ritter's favor is as long as Cincinnati is in contention to win the AAC again, they have to lean on him, right? That is a determining factor on how much work and how active he stays running the ball as opposed to throwing it as well. And then for me, the one thing that I think I'm going to be watching as well is I think Josh Weil is an underrated tight end for college fantasy football. He's not a tight end that's going to go early, but in that style of offense, that RPO offense, the tight ends are heavily used in that system. And Weil's a guy that you can target in your drafts in mid to late rounds. He's not going early. So if you miss out on the top tier tight ends, that may be a guy that you could pick up, mid to late rounds and get just as good value as some of those tight ends after like 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah, I think he was rated like number 3 among all FBS tight ends in Pro Football Focus's grading scale. Yep. So he is a talented player. I probably prefer him best as your second option, but he's right up there in the top 15 among tight ends. Just a real quick note on Ritter, and I was looking at this. If you look back over his last 3 years, not only his passing attempts per game, but his rushing attempts per game have increased every single year. So while I talk about the division of kind of volume with him and Ford, maybe the impact that Ford has on Ritter's kind of volume, both throwing and running the ball is minimal, and it doesn't matter who's the running back there, and maybe we see increased usage with Ritter.
Oh, I think this could be a situation where this is an offense that we know, you and I, it's gonna that RPO, that running game is going to dictate a lot of what Cincinnati does. Ford and Ritter are going to be a major part of that offense. You almost feel like the wide receivers are just they're just ancillary, they're just extra pieces to the offense. They're just, and I'm not saying that no one's going to emerge as a go-to receiver, but I'm looking at that offense and I'm seeing Ritter and I'm seeing Ford 1, 2. And for me, that's why I'm throwing out Weil as a tight end, because for me, I just don't know if a wide receiver is going to be significant enough week in and week out in that offense. Are you targeting any wide receivers there? Because I'm not targeting any of their wide receivers in any drafts that we've played in.
No, I think just late in a best ball, it was our P5 draft. I selected Alec Pierce, who he's been productive, but when he's on the field, which he's been injury prone over his career. So he would be the guy to target if anybody, but no, I'm not targeting any specific Cincinnati pass.
Yeah, I think Cincinnati is going to be pretty straightforward for us. A lot of Cincinnati, I would think, falls into the category for both you and I as guys that, teams that we feel like we have a pretty good peg on. And all of a sudden we just want them to get through preseason camp healthy, right? That's the only thing we really want. That's going to do it for the AAC. Mike, do you want to put a bow on this? Any other thing that we talked about that you want to circle back to or mention before we kind of close shop here?
Well, I think we covered it.
Yeah, look, guys, that's it. That's everything the AAC that Mike and I are looking at this preseason and even into the season. We've done the ACC. We're doing the AAC. We're going to alternate, go Power 5, G5. Next up on the list is going to be the Big 12. And, within a 7 to 10 day window on the site, these podcasts and these video shows should be uploaded. So that's going to do it for Mike and myself. We're done with the preseason preview with the AAC, and we'll see you guys on the next show when we're talking about the Big 12.